Manual, always, for me. So this is kind of fun, okay? This is a new thing I've done. I'm going to move out of your way, David, because you can understand this, right? You look like a deer in headlights right now. So in the end, if you disagree with me, it's completely fine, right? But I shouldn't say guarantee. I shouldn't guarantee anything. But so this is an example I want to show you of how I shoot manual and why it works. So the way I shoot manual is, I'm going to go through it really quickly, okay? But I think it's going to make sense. So I'm going to ask you guys a question. What are the three things that affect exposure, basically? What are the three things that go into making a photo?
From our camera.
Yes.
ISO, aperture, and shutter speed.
ISO, aperture, and shutter speed, right? Okay. Which one of those three is the hardest one to change? Takes the most amount of button pushing to change?
ISO.
ISO, right? Okay. So you don't want to be changing ISO a lot because it slows you down, right? Especially on these cameras. Those, I mean, I think all like new cameras have that. But I mean, you know, on this is shutter, this is aperture, right? I can change it like that so quickly, but I got to do two buttons here, and you know, all that kind of stuff, right? So what I do is I decide my ISO first, and I set it and forget it. You know, like those infomercials, like when they're cooking chicken, set it and forget it, right? And I just, to a point, obviously. I set my ISO for the scene, okay? Whatever that's going to be. I put my ISO as high as I possibly can all the time. Because the reason I bought the 5D Mark III is because I have motion blur more than autofocus issues. I have motion blur issues in my images. I cannot handhold a digital camera like I used to a film camera. I could handhold a film camera at 10th of a second, 15th of a second, easy. And now it's like I get motion blur at 2/50th of a second sometimes, which is ridiculous. It drives me nuts. So I bought this, A, for the ISO performance, because it has great high ISO, but I also bought it because it's going to allow me to get my shutter speed higher, right? Okay? So I set ISO usually like for as high as I can get it and feel comfortable with it. Then I set the aperture, okay? And this is one reason I don't like aperture priority, because aperture priority is then, in theory, choosing my shutter speed for me. And so that, I don't want that to go too low, and then I end up getting motion blur, right? But I set my aperture next, and because usually, think about how many things you want. Like ISO, you only have a certain amount that you can actually use, right? 400 or 200 up to like 3200 maybe, right? Aperture, you only have like a few apertures that you can really use, right? We don't want to run around shooting at 5.6 or f8 all the time because we have too much depth of field, and it looks like an iPhone picture, right? And so, you know, I'm usually around like f2 to like f4 max. That's not very many options, right? But shutter speed, I have tons of options, don't I? I have 30 seconds all the way up to 8,000th of a second, right? So all I'm doing is I'm setting my ISO and I'm setting my aperture, and I'm just adjusting my shutter speed all day long to match the lighting conditions that are there. Does that make sense? So all I have to worry about is that dial, right? Okay? And so what I'm doing now is I literally have broken this down in my head to, on Canon, left is light, right is dark. Nikon, right is light, left is dark. Okay? That's it. Like, that's how stupid I am to myself. And all I do is I see light, and I go, oh, that's light. Go to the right. That's dark. Go to the left. And then I look at the back of the camera, and I make sure I'm in the right place, and I keep going. So left is light, right is dark. Left is light, right is dark, right? But you always have to remember where you're at on the numbers, of course. You don't be like, left is dark. You just, I got to get more, you know, or left is light. I got to get more light in. And then you're like, oh, I'm 1 second exposure. That's not going to work, right? You got to pay attention to where your numbers are. But when you've already set yourself up for the scene and you're in those right places, then that's all you're doing. All you're thinking to yourself is you're just watching the light and you're just adjusting for it as it happens, right?